Business is messy and unpredictable.
Sometimes lonely.
So lonely.
So lonely.
And inspiration can often come from really weird places.
We pick up where the bullet point blogs and the highlight reels leave off.
We start with the stories. Welcome back to So Here's My Story. I'm Jody.
I'm Eliot.
And last week we made a really big deal about it being the final episode of year one.
That was a really big deal.
It was. We spent a good minute or two talking about it, and I think we were wrong.
Well, we may have been wrong.
So last week was episode number 51, and there are
Correct.
50. So we were thinking that was like the final episode, because the first episode counts as one. Anyway, I never did sit down and figure out the math of this, but I think maybe this is the last episode of our first year because it's the 52nd week.
Well, it's kind of like going back to, was the year 2000 the first year of this millennium or the last year of the previous millennium?
Right. In this case, I'm pretty sure like our first episode was week one. It's unlike age where, you've spent the first year, so now you're one. It's like anyway, doesn't matter. Point being, this is either, instead of this being a 2-week celebration where last week was the end of season one and now we are starting our second year, I say we turn it into a 3-week thing.
Absolutely.
Where last week was either nothing or our last one. This one is either our first one of the new one or our last one of that. And then next week is either nothing or our first one.
So it's kind of like having Easter and Greek Easter.
Right.
Yes. So nice.
Except not.
Yeah. Well, and I have a story, but why don't we just spend the next half hour just talking about this phenomenon?
Perfect.
Because
Yeah,
they're great analogies.
If we could see the data of people listening, it's like fall off. I'm like, see you later. We'll check you next time. All right. So speaking of your story, why don't you thank our sponsors? And
Yes.
then, before you do though,
okay.
Just a quick reminder to hop on the website at sohere'smystory.com or via the Facebook page to visit the group. We are really focusing in the next few months on getting more conversations going there. And we would love to have you there because from emails and messages that we get, as I understand it, you're sometimes having the conversation with us in your head. So we would love to have that conversation with you online. So
Yes,
please join us and we hope to see you there. Now you can thank the sponsors.
I shall. As always, like to thank Tom Loveland at Mind Over Machines, Cat's Copy, the architecture firm of GWWO, and Marycraft Staffing and HR Solutions.
All right, let's hear your story.
So here's my story. I fired a client. And
you say that with a little bit more glee. Like there was like a twinkle in your eye.
There is. And it has nothing to do that the twinkle in my eye, the understated elation in my voice has nothing to do with the quality of company that this was, because they're a great company. They're run by terrific people. And it took me a while to arrive at the conclusion that I needed to do this. One of the reasons that it took me a while to arrive at that is because they were profitable. We charged money and they paid it, and that was American. So, they were profitable. But here's the thing, and it actually, my thinking kind of crystallized around something that you had said to me in conversation in a different context, but I translated it as this, which is if somebody came along and took all of your clients away, or said they were going to take all of your clients away, which ones would you fight to keep? And I've thought about that. And actually, in the past couple of weeks, I've had conversations with a number of people based on that formulation. If somebody took all of these tasks away from you, all of these projects away from you, all of these clients away from you, which one would you fight to keep? And in looking at this client that I'm talking about, I was looking at it through that lens, and I realized it would be with a sense of relief that I did not keep them.
Yeah.
And so I had to go deeper into it, because I certainly get, if they were responsible for 80% of my income and the lights would go off and I wouldn't meet payroll, then you don't get that luxury.
But that's a conscious choice.
That's a conscious choice.
Versus just an autopilot.
Yes. But they weren't responsible. Look, it would be a ripple. I'd rather have money than not. But at the same time, I started examining, why
you can't ignore that relief. Yeah, you're like, what's up with that relief?
Right. So why would it be a relief? And I realized that the client was not coachable, was extremely needy, but not in, oh, I just need your advice or whatever. But there were some,
because you love that. I mean,
I do. I like when I am needed for things, and they use me as a sounding board, and we can plan strategy. But there seemed almost to be a manic quality about it, and it was the coachability thing that really got to me, and I didn't. After all of the time we would spend, they would go off and they would do, which is the same point, they would go off and do whatever they were going to do anyway, which is not to say that somebody has to listen to everything I say.
Of course not.
But I began to feel that I wasn't adding value.
Yeah.
That it might have satisfied an emotional need in the client to spend some time with me, but it didn't really add value, and it didn't fulfill a purpose. And I didn't see myself as important.
It wasn't satisfying for you. Like, yes. It's like, okay, why are we even having this? It's like when my daughter says, should I take the red one or the blue one? I say the blue, and she says, great, I'll take the red one. Yes. I'm like, why are you even asking me?
Why are you asking me? And I realized in the aftermath of each of these episodes that I would get irritated. It would just kind of, my stomach would start to churn a little bit. And so all of that went into my thinking of, why would I be relieved? Why would I not fight to keep them? And then I made the decision, and I might have mentioned this in a previous podcast, but this happens a lot, that when you make these decisions and you agonize over it, the people in your staff that most of your staff knows what's going on, particularly in a small company. And they came to me and said, oh, thank God.
Yeah. You know, so it's so interesting, because every example you used when you dug into that, like, what's up with this relief, was so nuanced that you actually even felt like you had to kind of caveat several of the points. Like, they weren't coachable. They didn't take my advice. Not that I mean that everyone has to, you know, or I would, you know, this is not that blah, 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 blah. That's the thing, is that, like, what I love about that exercise is that I think a lot of, especially in business, because it can be so complex and there's so many different variables to consider, that a lot of times the really deep truths are in really fine print nuance. And in order to see nuance, because it is so like fine threaded or something, what that exercise does is it creates contrast. And you have to create that. Your brain needs contrast sometimes to see things. And the way I came up with that little formula is, like, if I took everything, it was actually a moment of desperation when I was facilitating this team event where it was I think this happens a lot in companies. The team had sort of taken their shape based on, you know, they had a certain number of people, and then they lost a person. And in that case, they couldn't exactly, they had trouble finding a person. And then there were some financial things. So they went a while without that job. So a few other people absorbed some of those things. And they hired somebody who did that and a few other new things that had come up. And then that happened 2 or 3 times. And you see this happen where people's list of tasks start to take on a really odd shape. It was never really intended to be that way, but, well, so-and-so's been there forever. So they've just sort of taken on different little bits and pieces of things. And they end up with this weird, almost kind of like crustaceans, where they just have all these sort of extra globby bits that are on in a weird kind of shape, but they're used to doing them. Maybe they don't mind doing them. And so we were trying to do a little bit of a reset of, like, what's your highest and best use? What are you best suited for? And there's this one woman who had been there forever. I kept saying, like, what's your favorite thing? And she's like, well, I like it all. Cause she was doing a tiny bit of everything in the whole process. Right. From recruitment, it was an HR team, from recruitment clear on through to onboarding, and then all the compliance stuff going forward with benefits and whatnot. She's doing a tiny piece. Which so many leaders do. If you're a leader in a small to mid-sized business, particularly, you find yourself doing a tiny piece of everything. A mile wide and an inch deep. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And that's how her job description looked. And I was like, well, what about this? She's like, well, I don't mind that. I kind of enjoy that. That's fun, whatever. And I knew that we needed to make more sense of all of it. And just kind of in a moment of desperation, I tried that. I said, okay, let's look at this one other way. And because I wasn't I was like, maybe that is the right shape for her to be in. I don't know, but it didn't feel right. And I tried 20 different ways of asking the question. She was like, no, I like it all. I'd hate to give any of it up. And then I said, which is interesting. She said, I hate to give any of it up. I said, all right, let me ask a question a different way. Just one more diagnostic question. If I took everything away from you and you had to fight me to get something back, what would you fight for? And she goes, oh, that, and that. Done. And the clarity that like drastic, overblown kind of, and I use that skill a lot where I'll just say like, oh, if I'll make the circumstances really ridiculous because it then provides the contrast to see nuances that you otherwise can't see. I think it's, it does remind me, and I'm going to slip this in because it doesn't count as a story, of a very quick moment from our Italy trip. I
think this does count as a story.
No, it doesn't, because I didn't start with, I didn't say the words, so here's my story.
It only counts if you start with it.
Yes, it only counts as a start. Words. Plus, it's really quick. It's not really a story. It's just like a little vignette.
It was going to be really quick until we started dragging it out like this.
Sorry about that. Very quick. When we were at the pivotal dinner, the birthday dinner, which was this like 4-hour dinner event at one of the best restaurants in the world, as they say, the sommelier, because they did a wine pairing with all of it, and it was towards the end, and this guy, the sommelier, came out to like pour us our drink for that thing, and Christy actually asked him, how do you, like, what do you use to pick? And he didn't. His English wasn't, he was Italian. He didn't speak a ton of English, it didn't seem like. And he sort of paused for a second, and the word he used, he said, we look for contrast, which was not matching, which was such a surprise to me because I'm not super wine savvy. So I had just always assumed that wine pairing had to do with matching or complementing, which I guess contrasting is one way to complement, but I think of complement more as matching up with.
Right.
And it's not. And as I thought back on some of the best pairings that we had in that meal, I was like, oh, absolutely. It creates this contrast to really bring out whatever it is they want to bring out in that dish. And that to me feels very familiar, how you create this contrast and it brings out the nuances of something that otherwise feels fuzzy and blurry.
No, and it's interesting to me because in my discussions with clients, whether we're talking about what the partners can do, or even mission statements, if they're talking about that, if you're talking about what you want to accomplish, in my experience anyway, they tend to use a lot of generic words. We're going to do this, we're going to quality, we're going to love, and we're going to do this, or whatever. But if you then turn it over to the team and say, okay, describe your worst retail experience, or what did you hate about this? Well, then the stories come. Then they're like, well, when this person hovers and I can't find this, and the address isn't on the website, or I need to find it. And there's, okay, well, let's do the opposite of that. So that's where a lot of the contrast comes in, because your brain goes to those things.
Mm-hmm. One of my, I had a client for a number of years who then just, I no longer work with him as a client, but he's a really good friend. And he's someone who is so helpful to me when I feel, I love, there's a certain kind of way something feels in my brain that I will then go seek him out, because I know he'll do this thing where, because he's incredibly definitive about things. He's like, well, you just need to go do this. He's one of those people. And I love it because I go to him when I feel like I feel like I'm being indecisive because I don't have super strong opinions about something, or it feels super blurry and I can't. But what I find is, this is so funny, the minute, and it's not like I react to everything he says, because some things I'm like, okay, that makes sense. But without fail, 2 or 3 or 4 times, he'll say, well, we just need to blah, blah, blah. And he'll hit on something that I react so much to, no, not that I'm like, oh, I do have a strong opinion.
Right, that's incredibly helpful.
The not that, like I am someone who sees possibility really naturally, and that's so I can see infinite possibility, which can make me indecisive because I'm like, well, I can see so many paths. And so for me, it's really valuable to have people who are very definitive in their, like, you should do this or you should do that. Because sometimes I find that information helpful, and other times is the only way I can be so clear. And I'm like, absolutely not. I'm not doing that at all.
But you can see that in everyday life. If you've ever been confronted by a question of where to go for dinner, and you ask your companion, you say, where do you want to go? Oh, I don't know. We can go anywhere. Great. Okay. Then we're going to X. No, I don't want to go to X.
Which can feel so annoying, but it's just that is that I think as a leader of a company, you have to be careful. If you, I talk to people who are frustrated because they'll say to their team, tell me if you have ideas, this broad version of the question. What do we, give me your feedback. What do you think? Where should we go? And
crickets. And
they're like, well, I've asked them what they want. They can't tell me. So finding ways to not do it for them, but just provide contrast. Like one of my favorite questions, and this is more on the operational side, less on the kind of vision side, although also that, again, something that I took from Andrea Lee, which was this exercise of, well, if we were 10 times the size, which doesn't mean our goal is to be 10 times the size, but it certainly does shine a light on what would break if we were 10 times the size, or what would we hate a great way to decide if your company should ever be 10 times the size is like, what would that feel like? In our last episode, you talked about when you got to a point where there were more clients than you felt right about.
Yeah.
When I first started my business, I thought I wanted 20. I was like, if I had 20 clients, that'd be great. And I got to about 15 and I was like, this doesn't feel good. I have to look at my notes to remember exactly what we were talking about. And like, that was the first way I figured out that's not what I wanted.
And real fast, just to that point, I was meeting 2 weeks ago just for coffee with this marketing company. Mm-hmm. And they were actually looking at coming on with me as a client, but we were talking about their business and I was really interested. And one of the things that the president of the company said to me is, if you did, talking to me, if you did X, Y, and Z, we could do this for you. Your phone would never stop ringing. And my reaction was,
oh my God, that sounds
I don't want
terrible.
That. That's not what I want. But for him, that's what he's selling, that your phone would never stop ringing. I was like, no.
Right. But boy, isn't that great to know? So like when you are prioritizing what Wagenheim Law needs to focus on, like that's not it. We're not a mill. Yeah, you're not a mill. That's so, people spend so much time like articulating their values and their mission and their vision. And yes, you can hear a drip of sarcasm in my voice when I say that, because I think that oftentimes it's more just paying attention to what your gut says about something. And while most of these examples we're using are of, the smaller businesses, I in no way, these things all apply to larger directives. Like, just because you're in a much, much larger organization does not mean that these navigational points aren't exactly the same, because your team needs to be navigating as that size team within the larger organization, and they still need contrast to find their way.
No, and it's not even, you took it up to larger because this is not dependent on the size of the organization, but I'll take it in another way. It's not even dependent on organization, because I've asked people who work for me or people who are employees, not executives, but employees in other organizations, what do you want to do? What do you want to get better at? The kind of very, very horrible question, which I hate, which is, where do you see yourself in 5 years? But that sort of thing. And you get crickets, you get just blank stares. But if I've been working with somebody for a while, if they've been here and they didn't know the answer to that question, but now I say, okay, what did you really not like doing? If you had a completely free schedule and I said, hey, I have a project for you, what would make you either excited or what would make you go, please, dear God, don't let it be this. Don't let it be this.
Yeah.
And when you start to talk to them about the contrast, then you can hone in on, well, if you've got 5 things that you've worked on and you hate these 3 and one is just kind of mediocre, but here's the other one. Maybe we can kind of start angling you towards that one.
Yeah.
You're like, oh yeah, I do really like it when you have those projects for me.
Yeah. It's so interesting to me how important contrast is. And I think what is interesting to me about it is that we tend to not seek it out. Like we tend to, this is a loosely formed thought, so it might take a second. We tend to seek out, I think things like ease or comfort or simplicity start to feel like the middle ground. I was using this metaphor yesterday with somebody and they had no idea what I was talking about. So hopefully it's this, somebody else will.
So
hear.
You figured
so I'm going to use it again.
Expand it to a wider audience.
It sounds like it'd be perfect. So like my inkjet printer at my office, and every inkjet printer I think I've ever had, the tray, because whether it's the feeder tray at the top or the one you put the paper in, can expand or contract, because it can do envelopes, it can do 11 by 17, whatever. In the ones I have, although apparently this person doesn't work this way, they move in tandem. So there's
Yes.
like a little lever and you move one and the other one moves with it. So they go in or out together,
Yes.
right? Okay, so I'm not crazy. That's a thing.
I'm still with you.
Thank you.
Still with you.
That was the part that lost them.
Oh,
so
really?
yeah, I don't know what inkjet world they've been living in, but
No, I am
okay.
purely in your inkjet world.
Thank you.
Yes.
I want that on a t-shirt. I am in your inkjet world. That there is a, I was using the metaphor in a slightly different context yesterday, but it's like that middle of the road thing. In that context, I was saying like, you can't numb out one end of a feeling perspective. You can't not have the bad and only have the good. Like they go hand in hand, so that your ability to withstand like bumpy, hard things also goes hand in hand with your ability to get to enjoy the really good stuff. So that was the way I was using it. But in this context as well, kind of navigating towards the middle where things are not contrasted, where they all blend together, seems to be how people want to see things, like really simplistically without all the nuance. But it's actually harder to have clarity when you stay in the middle ground. By expanding out into the edges of like more contrasted perspectives, you suddenly get this, it's literally like walking way out, so you have a broader perspective than being like in it too closely. So you're like right up against it. You can't see it.
Well, I think when you're talking about personnel, though, I think there's a definite skill, but it expands to a culture where if you've typecasted your people to say that she's going to do this, or you typecast yourself and say that I'm going to do only this, there's a whole range of topics there. You know, whether you have the freedom to explore, you have the freedom to make mistakes. Those two are like the inkjet thing.
Right.
If you're going to give the freedom to explore and that goes out, you've got to expand the freedom to make mistakes.
Yes.
So, and then you've got to figure out how you learn from that. But so going back to my example with one of my employees, I wouldn't be able to have the conversation with her to develop that contrast of, well, what do you hate? What project, if I came to you, would you go, oh, please, dear God, not that? Unless I gave her a variety of things to do. If I'm only giving one thing, if she's only writing letters to me, or only making cold sales calls to somebody, well, then you don't have an opportunity to explore contrast and in that way discover what really would make somebody sing.
Well, and that, I'm so glad you brought it back to that, because that shines us in a slightly different light, but I think it gets to the nugget of what's important about this whole conversation. Because a lot of what we've talked about here is how to find the clarity in something, whether it's within what someone else wants or what you want or need. I find that because most of the examples we were using were very specific. Like, if I took everything away from you, what would you fight to me to get back? Or like, if you were 10 times the size, it was a singular version of that.
Yeah.
But the way you were just talking about it reminded me of something that I often use, because when I'm talking to someone, especially if I haven't spent a ton of time with them, I don't know yet whether they are someone who operates better from, like, people tend to, their brains work like one way versus another. So some people can respond to the not that more than they can than to the I want this aspirational thing, and vice versa. Some people are better at telling you what they hate than what they love, or what they love versus what they hate. So I often ask both. I'll say, like, come at this from whatever way it makes sense. Either tell me what you'd love for your life to look like, or what you're super clear that you don't want it to look like. Because, and even something as basic as scheduling, I'll say, let me know if there are days that are particularly good or particularly bad for you. Because I think creating contrast can actually help us get to the truth of things really fast. And so sometimes by just kind of painting out the edges of the continuum, we allow people's brains to gravitate towards the way that their brain works the easiest. And then you get to, whereas if you're only going in the way your brain thinks, that would sort of be the nugget I would want to leave with. If you're frustrated with getting information out of someone, it might be because you're going in the way your brain works, and they need to be thinking about it in a different way, from a different angle. So creating more contrast and expanding out the kind of viewpoint leaves the space for that.
Yeah. And I'll tell you, while you were speaking, I was debating between, wrapping this up with one of two kind of stories, but very short examples. One of which shows you that I have deep-seated psychological issues, certainly as a child. But so
because I needed a story.
You needed a story for that. Well, it's just when I was a kid, what drove my mother crazy is when she would take me to pick out clothes. I had it in my mind that the only things that I wanted were earth tones, and the only thing that matched, if you had tan or beige pants, then you had to have a brown shirt. If you had brown pants, you had to have a tan or beige shirt. And that was it.
Wow.
And there were some other certain requirements like Western pockets, which I won't even get into. But so I basically took my mother down to, in all of Baltimore, one pair of pants that were possibly, but I couldn't see the contrast. I was always just going with what I thought matched. It had to be monochrome. So, but getting to the other point about just seeing the contrast, what I've done now, and I found myself doing it, it's just a matter of habit at this point. Like the other day, I couldn't find my phone. I knew that my phone was on my desk somewhere, and I stood up and I couldn't find it because my desk is a mess. I couldn't find it at all, and I'm looking. And then I did what I've trained myself to do, which is I got up out of my chair and I walked around to the other side of the desk, not because my phone was blocked from my vision, but when I change perspective, even on something that small, and I see the room differently, I can normally figure out what I'm looking for. But if I stay in the same place and only see what I'm accustomed to seeing from the angle I'm accustomed to viewing it, then I don't make any progress. So that's our story.
But the discussion doesn't have to end here.
No, it does not.
In fact, we don't want it to.
No, we don't.
That is why we actually have our private Facebook group,
which we started to make sure that we could get your comments, your rants, your thoughts,
your stories.
You
can find links to that group as well as show notes and links to subscribe via email and how to find us just about anywhere you can possibly find podcasts at sohere'smystory.com.
And you can also find us on Facebook and Twitter at SHMS Podcast.
And since we know it takes a village.
Yes, it does.
We'd like to thank our village, our super talented, incredibly patient team.
And occasionally snarky team.
Yeah, but in the best of ways.
In the best of ways.
Snarky.
Yes.
Good mockery.
So a huge shout out to the people who actually help us produce our show. First, our sound engineer, Tom Hansen.
Thanks to Christy Schmier for our brilliant show notes and all the other fantastic writing she does for us.
And to Taylor Mathauer for doing just a little bit of everything.
Including wrangling us. Which is no small feat.
No, it's not.
This is Jody Hume.
And I'm Eliot Wagenheim.
And you've been listening to So Here's My Story.